Alright, so in this video I'll be comparing the Festool surface clamp versus the Bessey surface clamp. These Besseys are new to the market, and they're kind of like marketing materials. They're kind of targeting specifically the Festool, so I thought it'd be an interesting thing to compare. So I've been actually using these Festools for a while now. They're kind of used up here. These Besseys are a few months old, but I have been using them, trying to put them through their paces. I did receive these as a free kind of like social media promotion that Bessey was running. I'm still not sure why I got them, but they essentially just asked me to do a piece of content on these without really giving me any other specifications, and they're not going to see this video, at least before it's out. So I thought that was important to mention, but I would have bought them anyways. I was interested in seeing what they were like. So I'm going to start off with a comparison of these knobs that you get with each package. So a little bit of a disclaimer though, I do find that I don't end up using these. They're just kind of hard to aim underneath and kind of tighten them down. So I tend to just kind of forsake the knobs entirely. But for the sake of comparison, I'll talk about them a little bit. So first thing to notice is that so they're both M8 threaded. The Bessey one is a little bit longer. Specifically, it is about, let's call it 15 millimeters, and then the Festool is closer to maybe 11. So you get a little bit more range there on the thickness of your worktop, but effectively I don't think that's a big problem. Usually you do have to turn it a little more, but it's not a big problem. In terms of construction, the Bessey here feels like this kind of bolt was molded in place into the actual plastic, so there's no play, it's like a single piece. The Festool is pretty clearly two different pieces of plastic, and then the bolt is in there, and it's a little bit wobbly. Not a big difference again in practice. Another difference to notice about the actual handles themselves is that the Festool is a decent amount bigger than the Bessey. That might be a factor if you are kind of like tight on space underneath your table. So specifically the Festool is about 46, 47 millimeters, and the Bessey is closer to 28, 29. So not a huge difference, but they are kind of more bulky. I do find the Festool is a little bit more comfortable, practically speaking. But again, I don't really use these, so you get 4 in your package, and I just kind of store them. Now for the bench dogs, so you get 2 of these per package. So just comparing them quickly, the kind of like bearing surface here is a little bit bigger on the Bessey. I don't think that's a really big difference. The markings on both of these say that this is PA6 with 30% glass filled, so they're both that material, which as far as I understand is a pretty good strong plastic. The Festool actually does have a second molded part here for what feels like TPU to add some kind of grip. In practice, I don't actually feel like this makes a big difference actually, but something to notice. I think what does make the difference is kind of their relative dimensions. So as you might be able to tell here, the Festool is quite a decent amount taller, and so if you have material that's kind of smaller than these stops, then you can actually put them against it and like sand the surface or apply finish or anything like that. So here again, there's some measurements here. The Festool is like, let's call it 17, almost 18, and then the Bessey is closer to 14 and a half. That is quite important. I mean, this kind of 18 millimeter dimension, or like 3/4 inch, is very common for a bunch of different plywood products. So yeah, this one sometimes causes an issue. You can just shim it up so that you have kind of like just the top part is actually clamping, but that's a pain. I think these are better for that. There's also a bit of a difference here in like where they actually are relative to the dog. In practice, I don't think that makes a big difference, but yeah, something to note. One of the biggest differences in my book is the actual length of the dog itself. So if I put them against each other here, you'll see there's a bit of a difference in length. So for the Bessey, there's actually 17.7, and the Festool, I can't really get a great measurement here, maybe closer to 16. That does become a variable if your top is very thin, because then the knob can actually completely thread and clamp it against that surface. I don't think that'll have a huge effect on the clamping, kind of like clamping quality, but that's just something to notice. So if I come with this demo here, I've just threaded the knob and the stop together on this piece of 18 mil Baltic birch. So I'm actually, I've tightened this completely, and this still can spin, whereas with the Festool, if I bring it in here, so as I tighten it down, same piece of material, now this is kind of locked in, and I can't really undo it without unscrewing it. So if your top is thin, that might be a variable, although I don't think it affects the actual clamping performance very much. Now moving on to the actual clamping elements themselves. A bit of a different approach here. I'll note that these front pieces that I'll call heads are essentially the same as the stops, in that the bottom dog here is also the same as the stops in terms of it being kind of a little longer on the Bessey. Small little difference here, there is a V-groove for if you're doing kind of circular things, or I mean, I haven't used it, but that is a variable. Yeah, so same height and everything, and bearing surface. Small other difference is that the actual body of both of these is a little different in size. So this dimension here on the Bessey is bigger than this dimension here on the Festool. Practically though, I don't think that's a huge variable, given if you need to clamp something and this is getting in the way, you just push it a little forward, and then when you clamp, you have all this extra room here to do whatever you want to be doing with it. So part of my testing is I actually did a kind of like a lifting test. When these Bessey things came out, they were really trying to sell that these kind of don't lift the material. As far as my testing goes, these do actually lift less. So it's can be slight depending on the situation. I think both of these it can be put in circumstances where they lift. So if the dog hole is too loose, then both of these will actually lift. But if the dog hole is well formed, the Besseys have some kind of weird technology in them that makes them kind of pull down as you're pushing, which is kind of helpful. The Festools, I mean, they're always going to be a little bit higher on the table. It's not a huge issue, but something I noticed and something I think Bessey did well. Another difference between the two of them is, I noticed this when I was actually just clamping things. The Bessey pushes a lot harder on the material, to the point where I was a little bit worried about my dog holes. I'm not as worried about it anymore. I'll explain why. So there's about double the strength on the Besseys versus the Festool. I don't think these Festool are slouches really. And all the time that I've had them, it hasn't really been an issue. But I have here a comparison with some of these other clamps that I have to give you a sense of roughly how they stack up. Now, in terms of the mechanism itself, the Bessey doesn't actually show anything. It's kind of like a closed box. The one thing to note maybe is that there's these two springs at the back. And these actually, when the clamp is completely kind of closed, whenever you put force on the head, it will actually compress those springs. And so I think effectively what that means is that this clamp head cannot push harder than those springs will allow it to. And so that kind of, it's a release valve kind of, I assume, might also be part of the mechanism that actually pushes it down as it goes forward. I'm not super clear, but it's kind of a nice feature. The Festool clamps are kind of, everything is exposed here. You can see the whole mechanism. There is a kind of a hardened piece of metal here that is wedged against the bar. There is a bit of a kind of like an adjustment looking thing back here. I've never been able to find information about it, but it seems like it might adjust things. One thing to note here with the Festool specifically is that the bar will get a little bit damaged by clamping. So if you're clamping anything repeatedly, especially, it will really dig in, and it makes it kind of noisy to move back and forth. That's not a huge problem, but Festool does recommend that you use some sandpaper once a year and just kind of like rub it down. That will cut down on the kind of sound, but I did find that, when you're doing these repetitive tasks that you use the same thickness of material or whatnot, it does kind of lose its clamping strength after a while, which is a little bit frustrating. As far as the Besseys go, I also noticed that with that extra clamping strength, you also have a bit of an issue, or I've run into a bit of an issue where this bar actually just kind of swings out a little violently, especially if there's pressure putting on the front of it. And I've actually hurt my fingers a little bit doing that, so another thing to take note of. And now finally, I think the retailers that I can find online, it looks like the Festool is about double the price of these Besseys. So I think, you'll be happy with either of these options. I've never really wanted more than the Festools, but I'm happy to have the Besseys, and I think both of them do their function very well.